Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different, a lot more chatty, and I'm basically going to be talking about my Japanese. So on my channel, I mainly focus on two languages, French and Japanese. And at this point in time, my Japanese is the worst of the two. But this wasn't always the case. Around 2020 to 2022, I was actually quite advanced. I could read news articles, I won a speech contest, and I took and passed the JLPT N2. I was basically at my max. I went fairly into depth about my Japanese learning journey in this video where I explained how I passed the JLPT, but I'll give a brief summary. Basically, I started learning Japanese when I was 12 just for fun. I learned hiragana and katakana and a few greetings and nothing else. Then a couple of months later, I started learning it more seriously, just using free guides on the internet and YouTube videos. That continued for a while until COVID hit, and I had a lot more free time, so I was able to study a lot more, and that was the reason I got so good. Eventually, after completing the JLPT, which was one of my biggest goals in Japanese, I started studying as hard, and over time, my Japanese got worse. And it became a bit of a toxic cycle because as my Japanese got worse, it became harder for me to consume the content that I used to consume before, which put me off watching and reading stuff in Japanese, which in turn made my Japanese worse. I'm at that really frustrating stage where I look at words and they seem so familiar, but I just can't quite remember what they mean, and I know that at some point I did know what they meant. I've put off restudying Japanese because I know it's going to involve a lot of going over stuff that I've gone over before, and I find that quite boring, but honestly at this point it's been a while, and I actually want to do it now, so I don't think it'll be too bad, having to restudy some things. So around COVID time, I went very hard into reading in particular. I've always loved kanji, they're the reason I started learning Japanese, and I love studying them. And as a result, the vocab section of the JLPT was my strongest. So it's quite annoying that one of the first things that I forgot is kanji. I can still read most of them, as in know what they mean, but I forget the actual readings, how to pronounce them, and I really struggle to write them. Though I was never very good at writing them, since that's not really important nowadays. One thing that made me get very good at kanji for the N2 was reading the news, which was also a very good way of keeping up with the world, which is something that I don't do that much nowadays. This was during COVID time, so the news wasn't very pleasant most of the time, but that sort of news didn't really disturb me, and I actually really liked to know what was going on, since I felt very sheltered, stuck at home all day. But I would usually go into the international section of the news and see what was going on in the world, since reading news articles about how many COVID cases there were became very, very repetitive. In 2020, the international news was mostly about the American election, so I learned a lot of government-related vocab, which was absolutely useless to me, but those sorts of words did have a lot of N2 and N1 kanji in it, so I suppose it did sort of have some use to me. So in those days I'd spend hours on Anki creating and going through flashcards, and I don't really want to do that again, because even back then that was the worst part of my study routine. It became really overwhelming quite quickly, and I know it will send me back into a Japanese learning hiatus if I tried it now, because I always wanted to put the Japanese definition of things onto my cards. I didn't want to see any English in my cards, which was very, very helpful for my understanding, but it did mean that it took me very, very long to create flashcards, because that meant I had to pick a sentence, look up the words I didn't know in a Japanese dictionary. Then I would find quite often that I didn't understand the meanings of those words completely, so then I would have even more words to look up in a dictionary, and it just became a sort of spiral where trying to create one flashcard for one word ended up taking around half an hour and leaving me with 6 more cards in my deck. And then that meant that reviewing also took forever. There'd be times where I would be reviewing for about 3 hours, and I would feel really bad if I didn't complete all of my reviews, because then they'd just stack for the next day. But then I had to limit it to 200 at some point, because I just could not do it anymore. My brain was melting, and I really, really don't want to do that again, as much as I like Anki. Another thing I did a lot of back in those days was JLPT prep, but that was actually quite fun, because as I mentioned in my JLPT video, I was actually quite beyond the level I needed to be at quite early. Initially I was planning to take the N3 test, but I was actually past that point. And I very quickly got to an N2 level months before the exam, so then I would just cycle through a bunch of JLPT practice apps that I had on my phone, which was a great way to pass the time since there were multiple choice questions. They were quite easy to read, you could just do one and then leave it, and I was quite good at them. I went through all of the example papers that were available online, and that was also a fun exercise to see how far I'd get. And I would go through a bunch of YouTube videos, it was quite entertaining. I also journaled quite a bit, and I tried to write summaries of the articles I read. So, like I said, I was reading the news every single day, and I was also journaling every single day. And in my journal, when I ran out of things to talk about myself and my day, I would just write a summary of the news article that I read, and I tried to use the new vocabulary that I learnt, and that was really, really helpful. I kept that up until I passed the JLPT N2 in December of 2021, and then I burnt out. So I'd achieved my goals and there was nothing more to do, so I got really bored. And at that point, I was tired of spending hours a day on Anki, looking at Japanese, reading Japanese, listening to Japanese, and I kind of wanted to reach out to other languages. So then I started to restart learning French, and that took up a lot of my time and energy. And then also that same year, I started university and I had a lot less time. I've never really wanted to live in Japan. I would like to visit, but it's not that big of a goal to me. So my goals for Japanese were very simple from the start and have never really changed. I just want to be able to enjoy any content I want in Japanese with no or minimal disruption. So basically being very, very good at reading and listening comprehension. And there was a point of time where I was very good at both of those things, but it has gotten worse since. I've never really cared too much about speaking or writing. I do like to journal, but that's more of a way of practicing the vocabulary that I've learnt by reading or listening, and it's not really that much of a goal for me. And that's something you'll notice if you tune in to my monthly language learning goals videos, that I never really have very big goals for Japanese because I generally just don't really see myself doing anything with my Japanese. Japanese is just a fun language for me, not one that I intend to use. And maybe that will change. I'm not against going to Japan or anything like that. It's just not something that I envision myself doing. And it's why it's been so hard lately for me to make time for Japanese. Like for a long time I used to think that I didn't have the time to do the things that I did during COVID. And while that's true, that I have a lot more on my plate, I actually wasn't doing anything particularly difficult. I can still do the same activities and just scale it back slightly. The difference is more my motivation to do those things and how well I can prioritise my time to do those things. Because as I started to learn French again, my priorities shifted and any time that I would make for language learning ended up automatically going to French. And when French became the better language, then it became easier to study. So now it's sort of become this sort of mental battle where I try to not give in and do whatever's easiest for me and actually force myself to work on the things that I'm struggling with, which in this case would be my Japanese. And first, I think it's really important to try and figure out how much I've forgotten, because I'm not sure, and that impacts what I will do over the next couple of months. And I don't really know how to do this, and I don't think there's any sure way of doing this anyway, but I think I'll try to go over some JLPT papers. I'll obviously not do well on them, but it will be interesting to compare my performance now to how I was a couple of years ago. I've tried to use some of the JLPT practice question apps more recently, and I found that my kanji listening and reading skills are pretty much the same, even though it takes more effort to answer the questions, but my vocabulary skills have gotten much worse because I've got a more general feel of the language. Like I've forgotten nuances, and that makes things very difficult between very similar words because I no longer easily recognise the context in which certain words are said. It is a bit annoying that the JLPT is purely multiple choice because that means that it's easy for me to just guess my way through it, and I don't think I will do too badly. Like I definitely won't fail them, and I'll try not to guess any of them because there might be some that I get right by chance, but I do think that'll be a fun way to see how well I'd do if I did the JLPT right now. Another less subjective thing to do is to go through a list of kanji or vocab or grammar and just see how much I remember. I have been going through my liked videos on YouTube and watching some of the Japanese videos I used to really like. And there's a marked difference in how easily I understand them. It definitely just seems to be a case of lack of practice though, because it reminds me of when I was first learning Japanese way back when I was like 12, 13, where I would watch these YouTubers and I just like wouldn't understand a lot of what they were saying, but I would watch them anyway, and then eventually I just like got better. Like, it's been so long that I barely remember what exactly I did, because I don't remember doing anything in particular. I would just watch them and watch them and watch them, and every so often I would note down the words that I hear them say all the time, and going over words like that, and then also learning words from other sources that I then hear in those videos. Over time I just ended up understanding more and more until it got to the point where I could understand them super easily. And that's just something that I'm going to have to do again now. And as for reading, I want to get back into reading the news in Japanese. I don't read the news often because I use social media a lot more than I used to, and I find out a lot of news through there. But I would like to go back to my routine of reading the news every day in Japanese. To this day, it feels weird to open a news article and read it in English and not Japanese. And I would like to be more informed about the world around me, especially now that I'm an adult. So adding this back into my routine will be really, really helpful for me. I have a couple of books in Japanese, but I think I'll hold off until I'm comfortable reading shorter articles. I still haven't finished the copy of Le Petit Prince, but I'm going to start it again. And there's also another novel that I bought that I didn't even touch because it was at the point where I was getting sort of worse at reading and I didn't really feel like starting a whole novel at that point. I didn't really do much to improve my listening in Japanese, something I think I mentioned in my JLPT video. And I don't think I'm going to do anything special now except try to listen more actively and look up the words that I don't know, which is what I did back when I was a child. And it really, really helped. The only problem is I'm quite lazy and I can't be bothered to have a dictionary app or site open all the time. A lot of the times when I'm watching YouTube is to relax from work that I'm meant to be doing. So having to do more work after that is quite a lot. It also requires me to go back and watch the video multiple times, which is something I say I hate, but I actually do quite often. Like, if I know I have to do it, I won't want to do it, but I do actually end up watching videos that I like over and over again. I just can't force it. Like, there's some videos that I don't mind watching a million times over, and some I can't even get through once. And I think my biggest error over the past couple of months has been forcing myself to get through things that I really didn't want to, just for the sake of saying that I've done them. And this goes double for things that I've spent money on, for example, books and resources like that. Like, I know it doesn't work and it makes me not want to touch them again. But sometimes I just can't help it when I feel like I've not been doing enough, so I want to force myself to get something done quickly. Another thing that I've really wanted to do is consistently keep a journal in Japanese. I've been journaling on and off for years, and it's one of my favourite things to go back and look at my old entries, just to get a snapshot into what I was thinking about and doing at the time. I also have a terrible memory, so it's extra cool to go back and see things that I've completely forgotten. I've kept journals in both French and Japanese, but I think it's too much to expect myself to journal separately in two different journals for each language. I struggle enough to keep up my French journal when it was the only one I wrote in, so I think I'll just try to keep a journal in both of my target languages and write in whatever language I feel like. It annoys that little part of my brain that likes to keep everything separate, but I already use so many notebooks as it is, and I think that streamlining the process will make me want to do it more, especially because when things are out of sight, they end up being out of mind for me, and it's kind of annoying to just have two notebooks planted everywhere so that I don't forget them. So if I just have one that I take with me everywhere or that sits on my desk all the time, it's easy for me to remember to pick it up and write something in it. And you probably noticed I've not said anything about speaking, so speaking Japanese has never been one of my goals, and I'm not too interested in becoming really good at it. At my peak, I was definitely conversational, but it was my weakest skill. And I do want to get back to that point because I do think it's interesting to have conversations with people, even though I've never really had a proper conversation with anyone in Japanese. I do think that might be something cool to be able to do, but it's not really my goal. so I'm not really making any goals about it. Like, as much as I love setting goals, I feel like that's what put me off learning Japanese. There's just so much that I wanted to do, and then when I realised I couldn't do it anymore, or at least not as well as I used to be able to do it, that would just like demotivate me. Like right now, getting back to where I was is a very ambitious goal, and contrary to my French, it's really hard for me to plan it out in concrete steps, and that ends up really putting me off. Like even now, saying this on YouTube and knowing that I need to report back to you guys does put some pressure on me, but it's also like a really big motivator, and that's kind of why I'm making this video, because it does seem a little bit pointless. I'm just kind of rambling on about my Japanese for like 20 minutes. But the point is just to give some context into how I've been studying and the reason why my Japanese has kind of not been going anywhere. And also I've not really been focusing that hard on it, even though it shows up every single month in my language learning goals videos. Like sometimes I read back my goals and I'm like, my only goal for Japanese was to watch one YouTube video, and I wonder how that sounds to other people. The important balance that I really need to strike is setting realistic monthly goals that don't stress me out unnecessarily, and that's going to be difficult now that I have a lot more on my plate, but it is something that I really want to do, and it's something that I know I can do, so I want to try it out. And I want to try and make it more consistent in my videos. Like my monthly Japanese goals have always been really, really light because I haven't really wanted to study over the past couple of months. But like, honestly, I never really want to do anything at all. Like I would just sit in my bed all day if I could, because it's easy, and doing the things I actually like and would improve my life is not so easy. Like making YouTube videos, I really like doing it, and I know there are people out there who enjoy watching my videos, but I simply cannot be bothered sometimes. Like it's just so easy to not do it and just sit there feeling guilty about how I haven't posted in months, but I just can't bring myself to record or edit. And it's like the longer you don't do something, the easier it becomes to not do it. So I'm trying to break that cycle with my Japanese. I do kind of want to make this a series where I track my progress in getting back to a good level in Japanese. So stay tuned for that if I can decide to stay on YouTube for longer than a month at a time. That will definitely be something that's ongoing on this channel. So that's it for this video. Hopefully in the next year or so I can get back to where I was before in my Japanese and go back to enjoying the journey. Please feel free to give me ideas on what you do to get over a slump, or just any fun Japanese resources you've looked at recently. I particularly want to get into more books and graphic novels because it's something I've always been interested in without ever actually delving into it. Like I love reading, but it's something I don't really do that much of because what I do read are just like news articles, which while I do enjoy reading them, they're quite short and I wouldn't sit there for hours reading the news. I want something with a storyline, but I don't really know of anything good. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.